In this skill focus activity, we're going to take a look at adjectives and what happens when we put way too many in a sentence and how we can find that just right amount of adjectives in our sentences. So this activity is called adjective overload because we're actually going to overload phrases and sentences with too many adjectives. We're going to do too many, and then we'll narrow it down to the ones that we think are best and make for the best phrase and ultimately the best sentence. So the steps involved in this activity are basically to select a noun and to have a picture of that. It could be something from content, it can be something from home, but to have a picture or something that students have made as the topic for them to describe is step number one. Step two is a little bit tricky, and this is where teachers and families will need a little bit of practice at selecting the categories of adjectives that they want students to work on. So we'll go over all the categories here in just a minute, and you'll just pull from those in terms of which ones will fit best for the topic that students will be describing. Step three is all about coming up with all the adjectives we can for each of the categories. And this is harder than it sounds, as we think very specifically about describing like the age of something or the color or the texture. All of a sudden, it becomes a lot harder to think of lots of adjectives. So this step is critical for students to really spend time on as families, to work on high quality words with teachers as well. And the goal of this is just to get a lot of robust words. So don't settle for words that come to mind quickly. Do some synonym work and look up some more sophisticated ways of saying what you're wanting to say so that this is a chance to build vocabulary. And then step four will be for students to go through the different categories, choose one from each to create that overloaded adjective phrase. Remember, we have 5 categories here. So 5 adjectives is just too much, right? It's kind of like putting too much salt on your French fries. It just ruins them. So we want to sprinkle adjectives in like salt. They're very similar that way. And so this activity makes us put too many, which is part of the fun. We stretch too far to then know what sounds great and which ones do I like best in my writing. So that's what step 5 it will let students do, is they write that overloaded phrase on the line on the paper. And then step 6 is they're going to work with others. So this again could be at home with family, where you all are sharing what you came up with and give each other feedback of, oh, I love those 2 adjectives together, or oh, that's just so many, I didn't even think about all of those. So to give feedback to each other at home or in classrooms with a partner, the goal of this is just to hear an audience member's perspective on which adjectives they like the best that you have on your overloaded phrase. And then in step 7, the writer gets that final approval of saying, oh, I really, I appreciate what the reader gave me as feedback. I still really love these adjectives. These are my best or my favorite too. And then in step 8, they will work on creating a sentence. We'll give some verb guidance. We'll talk about how to do that in just a minute. And then step 9 is to share it. We want students to be able to put together a phenomenal level 1 writing, which is what this is. Level 1 just means it's 1 sentence. And students will get to share out their sentences either at home or in the classroom. So this is a phenomenal resource for you to have if you're a student, if you're a teacher, if you're a family member. These are the types of adjectives in the common order of description in English. If we are telling a quantity, we always tell that as the very first adjective above any of the others or before any of the others. We always tell quantity. Then opinion or emotion, then sensory, appearance, brightness and color, speed, origin, material, and purpose. Now, you'll see that sensory and appearance have asterisks, and that's because they can be broken down into subcategories. We'll get to that in just a moment. But I want to show you that this is very much true. If you look down at the samples at the bottom, you see 3 repulsive ancient mummies, right? You would never hear someone say ancient repulsive 3 mummies, right? That in English, that just does not have the flow. And for native English speakers, we just say it just doesn't sound right. But it's actually because there is a technical order. And so this is that common order. This is what every student and every writer needs to know in terms of what are all the types of adjectives, and then also what order they need to go in to make the phrase flow beautifully. One last thing on this page is just that we really typically don't see more than 3 adjectives to describe a noun, and that's pretty heavy. So back to the salt analogy, 3 adjectives is a lot. So we try to sprinkle in a little bit here and there and no more than 3 at a time. And that would be not by any means in every sentence, right? Kind of once in a paragraph or so, if students are needing to describe a topic. So let's break down sensory. This one's pretty straightforward in terms of it being the 5 senses. So you can see lots of great adjective choices here. And we've just got little visuals here to help students remember their 5 senses. And then appearance can be broken down into all of these. So we've got length, height, size, and dimension, weight, temperature, age, or time, and shape. So many different categories of describing of adjectives, right? So let's put this all into action. So here are a couple picture prompts, and I love using food, especially for those sensory descriptions. So that's one reason why I wanted to show you these beautiful pictures of turkeys, is because it's something that students could use a lot of their senses to describe. So we've got a picture of a turkey up there on the right. You've got all of the categories in this classifying design, and you can see that students would think about, well, how does the turkey, how does it feel, right? If I touch it, what does it feel like? That might be related to temperature, or that might be more related to kind of the actual texture of, say, the skin of it if they touch the outside of it. Sight, what does it look like? This could be related to the color, but also if it's seasoned or if it's crusty, right? They can kind of tell the different visual descriptions of it. Sound, if there is a sound to the turkey, they could certainly put this in here. It makes me think of some funny scenes from movies where, you know, the turkey kind of deflated when it was cut open. Sound might be a little tricky for this particular one, but you could think about sound would come in, especially if you're describing like eating popcorn or some kind of action or event that had the sound to it. Smell, most definitely, and taste, right? Those last 2 senses for sure could be filled out about a turkey. And, you know, we had the 2 pictures. If we go back to this slide here, we've got these 2 pictures of turkeys because sometimes they turn out beautifully. And then, as we all know, those of us who are in charge of turkeys on Thanksgiving, for example, you know, we know that they can sometimes just completely flop and get burned. And so it's fun to kind of just brainstorm and think through different ways of describing a topic and not always have it be perfectly cooked in this case. So from here, you can see some sample words that we've put in. This is actually doing some different adjective category. So you saw the sensory one in terms of the setup there. You're welcome to print that and use that with students or children in your family, or just sketch it on a sheet of paper. That's always what we love when students are making this on a sheet of paper. But here are other categories. We've got quantity, size, temperature, smell, and color. And then you can see all the choices that were brainstormed underneath. So under quantity, 1 turkey, a turkey. Size, we've got giant, humongous, massive, and then we've got diminutive. So sometimes turkeys, you know, they shrink, they become smaller as they're cooked, or maybe the family just doesn't need a big one, right? So it doesn't have to all kind of be synonyms of each other, is my point. You could have just lots of different ideas and choices as a bank of words. Temperature, steaming, just baked, burned. Smell, seasoned, aromatic, burned. So burned could kind of go in both of those categories. And then color, golden brown or charred black. Yeah, those, especially the ones from our sample. So then the goal here is to go through and choose. So you can see them being circled along or in each of the categories, and then it's all written out below. So 1 giant, steaming, aromatic, golden brown turkey. That's a mouthful. Let's all say it together. 1 giant, steaming, aromatic, golden brown turkey. Yeah, that's a lot of adjectives. It describes it really well, but that is a lot of adjectives. So what we want students to do then is to come to this next step where we give them a sentence stem. I helped my grandmother prepare, I helped my grandmother cook, or I helped my grandmother carve. All of them make sense. You can certainly change this out to other words, but the goal here is that we get a sentence stem. We get these strong verbs to connect into our phrase. And you can see in the 2 choices that were listed there that they're pulling from their long and adjective overload phrase, right? So I helped my grandmother prepare the giant, aromatic, golden brown turkey. Or I helped my grandmother carve the pitiful charred turkey that cooked for over 10 hours, right? So that first one, it follows everything in this presentation, right, to a T. The second one, if you notice, there's additional information added on at the end of the sentence. That's perfectly fine. This is not rigid. Nothing in writing with design is rigid. We want to unlock creativity and make writing fun for students and families. And so this is a great example of that, where yes, we've got the core of what we're working on, and then it makes sense to add this additional information that cooked for over 10 hours. So we always want to celebrate when our children add additional information, when students in our class take what we're working on and make it their own and share that. That's just a fantastic moment of realizing that they're really becoming a more accomplished writer. So here's a couple more samples of it. The first one, I think we read already, but then the second one, I helped my grandmother carve a 20-pound charred black turkey. Well, that's a little bit different from the ones that we just saw. So lots of great samples there. And then I wanted to show you it can be brought into content. So here's our state bird, the scissortail flycatcher, and doing its magic catching of insects in midair. And so what we want to do here is, again, walk through different categories of adjectives. So for this particular one, the categories of quantity, opinion, emotion, appearance, color, and speed were chosen. And you can see lots of words were put in here, especially under opinion or emotion. Some people find them interesting and fascinating, and sometimes they can come across as very aggressive birds or determined birds. Then appearance, you notice that as this one was being done with students, petite came up, and then grassland brown and prairie brown and tree bark brown. So all these different shades of brown became the focus, and the class realized, wait a minute, we're actually talking about color here. We're not talking specifically about appearance. It really kind of fits more into color. So they just drew arrows. We love doing this. We're not big fans of students erasing and rewriting. So anytime, whether you're working on a dry erase board, you're working on a sheet of paper, just draw arrows. There's no reason to erase and rewrite. And lastly, speed, darting and zooming, right? So appearance only has one, but we got 3 color choices. We've got 2 speed. We got a lot of opinion, emotion. So they don't all have to be even either when you're working on this. And then notice you got that phrase line at the bottom with the noun at the end. Because along with coming up with lots of different adjectives, we're also working on putting the adjective at the front of the sentence, which is one of our, or in front of the noun, which is one of our biggest pieces of, or tip that we like to share with writers, is put your adjectives in front of nouns. It makes them so much stronger. So let's see what gets circled here. Ooh, one, fascinating, petite. Oh, not circled. Okay. So one, fascinating, petite, tree bark brown, darting, scissortail flycatcher was one phrase. And then an aggressive, determined, tree bark brown, darting, scissortail was another. And so you can see some students chose the same one, some chose a little bit differently. So that's why there's different colors showing up here. This would be a great way for you as a family to just indicate different preferences by different family members. Or within a small group, if students are working on this, kind of assign a color to each student and see what they choose. And it's just nice to have some assurance from classmates or from family that, yeah, you know, we like those same words, or, hey, I really like one, you really like aggressive, right? So you can kind of talk through the different words that you like, both for looking for things that you have in common and then talking about the ones that are different that you like as well. And then you're seeing down at the bottom that already the words have been crossed out that the students did not want to use. So that top phrase became fascinating, petite, tree bark brown. And then the bottom one, an aggressive, determined, darting, scissortail flycatcher. So let's see what the sentence stem was. Remember, this is that next step after they have their phrases with about 5 adjectives, that overloaded phrase. Then we come here to a sentence stem and some verbs. Notice these are all in past tense, and I typically recommend that. Past tense is the hardest verb conjugation to understand in English because we have so many irregular words and forms of words in past tense. So I just encourage you as much as possible for write in the past tense, because not only is most writing in the past tense that's out there that students will be asked to do in the academic world, but also it just helps reiterate and practice all those past tense conjugations. So here's that first sentence. While out in a field, I watched A, determined, darting, scissortail flycatcher hunt a surprised grasshopper. You can see that additional information added on there. And then when I climbed a tree, I saw a fascinating petite tree bark brown scissortail flycatcher snatch a prairie brown grasshopper. So students in this group, they wanted to add additional information in about that grasshopper in the picture, even though that wasn't the part that we adjective overloaded. And then also students kind of changed out what was at the beginning, that prepositional phrase that was at the beginning of the sentence. We love when this happens. This is just something to be so thrilled about and to be so excited to see your children and students do when they take the idea and they run with it and they get to find their voice as writers. In Writing with Design, we say that voice is found when students have structure and choice. And this is a fantastic example of that. So in the rest of this resource for you, you've got lots of pictures. There are some adjectives that will be in here. Some will have things circled like this one, and you can see some phrases popping up that students came up with from this one. And then others, we just have them kind of ready for you to do, like Rubik's Cubes, and then a blank version for you to think about. This gnarly playground that I think any child would love to go play on, even some adults, right? And then a blank version for you to print here. So we've given you several that you can pull from, a couple pictures there for you to pull from. And then I just wanted to end by showing you what it looks like in even some academic settings and higher grades. So the scissortail flycatcher would certainly be one that's covered in Oklahoma history, whether that's in 3rd grade or 9th grade. But here's one about Central American cultures and traditions. And so beautiful pictures. We always love to find fantastic pictures. I'm sure so many of your families would have rich photos to share of all different types of cultural celebrations that are so wonderful for students to learn about, both at home and at school. So please pull those out, make these pictures as personable as you can to just make it more relevant for students. So here are a couple pictures. You can see again all these great examples of the words for all of them. You see that overloaded phrase at the bottom. So I hope all these samples will serve as banks for you to just kind of look at the quality of the words, different examples of these, and just spur your creativity of what you could work with in terms of doing an adjective overload. So here they come circled. And here's the verbs. And then here is a couple sentences where students wrote from that. So Central American cultures contain countless colorful celebratory traditions. Woo, lots of C words in that one. I love it. Central American cultures involve mesmerizing, memorializing traditions. Yeah, so great not connotation, but alliteration in both of these sentences where you hear that same sound over and over. And then we've even got the same letter, even though it makes different sounds in that first sentence. So love these samples. They're some of my favorites to share. And then these are super endearing. These students made ornaments and then did an adjective overload to describe their ornament and then wrote a sentence about it. Here are students making another ornament, this time more like a snowflake, a super colorful snowflake. And there are some of their dazzling creations they made. And look at what they did. So we typed it up, but this was straight from the classroom of what they came up with. Lots of different categories, lots of different adjectives. You can always Google and say, hey, what are some texture adjectives? And find that list of words and be able to pull that in. Look at that great long phrase, exquisite, one-of-a-kind, petite, smooth, vibrantly colored sequined snowflake. And lots of great verbs for them to pull in. So here we go. I'll show them this way. I decorated an exquisite, smooth, sequined snowflake. I made an exquisite, one-of-a-kind snowflake. I crafted a gaudy, bumpy snowflake with rainbow-colored sequins. Well, we hope you've enjoyed this skill focus activity. Adjective overload is such a fun one for students to do because it helps us learn just the right amount of adjectives in the proper order by kind of stretching too much, putting too many in, and then selecting those down to the best ones that we want to put into our writing. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Can't wait to see samples of this. And as always, happy writing.